much, and thanks for folks who are attending. And this is the third of a three-part series about climate storytelling and interviewing. And today we're going to get into more the emotional side of climate storytelling.
So this is, like Jason was saying, our final meeting today, and we're going to start out with a little icebreaker, just staying in the group here, and we'll chat a little bit about that. We'll do a little bit of a check-in, and if there's any questions in the beginning, and followed by we'll get into a little bit talking about climate anxiety and climate grief, and sort of working with those emotions in terms of creativity and storytelling. And also, we'll talk a little bit about trauma awareness when you're having conversations about climate change with people. And we'll have a little section on how you can leverage climate storytelling to sort of translate into climate action. And to sort of end our day today, we'll discuss amongst ourselves in the group, ways that we can, again, translate climate storytelling into action and change, and ways that you're already doing that or ideas that you have. It should be pretty free-ranging. And finally, we're going to play you the hummingbird story. Some of you might be familiar with this already from climate activist, environmental activist Wangari Maathai. It's a really great story, and I'm really excited to share it with all of you today. And we'll end with next steps, and if there's any questions or comments at the end. So let's get started. So for our icebreaker today, feel free to unmute your mic, raise your hand, put it in the chat. Have you been able to spend any time in nature or outside recently? And if you have, how did it go? What did you do? Was it a good time? We'd just like to hear if anyone's been able to connect with nature recently. Yeah, Mary, go ahead.
I was telling you before, but I'll say it to everybody, is that last weekend I got to go to, the weekend before last, actually, I went out to my local park here in Queens, and a bird organization put up some bird feeders in it like a year ago or so. And it's this beautiful spot in the middle of the forest that attracts all these migrating birds right now. And so it was really delightful to just sit there in the woods for I don't even know how long I was there. I lost track of time because it was just so peaceful and lovely and delightful to see dozens of different species of birds come through and come to me and me not have to do any work for it. So it was really nice.
That's great. The BBC did an Earth Day music concert presentation where they played classical and ambient music outdoors at a park in London, in East London. And I listened to that over the weekend on Earth Day, which I thought was really neat because they had the bird sounds in the background along with the music.
All right.
I think we can probably
go ahead. Okay.
Forge ahead. Yes.
So this is like a reminder from our first presentation, but because we're talking about emotions and climate change, I thought it was good to review this. The main idea here is that everyone has a range of emotions about climate change. And it's completely normal, and it really makes sense given all the changes we're seeing and how we're dealing with them. So it could be a mix of emotions like fear, grief, and sadness, which I'm certainly feeling myself when the losses we're seeing and the changes we're seeing so quickly. Anger is a very legitimate response, and certainly given that we know so much about, say, the fossil fuel industry right now and how much cover-up they've done about the changes, about climate change they've known for decades and haven't moved forward with that. So certainly I feel quite angry about that. And I know a lot of students I work with do as young people entering adulthood and given the situation we're in now. Confusion, and certainly this is valid given that we don't quite know where things are going to go. And I'll point out in a few slides that things are still open, and it's not like everything's fixed in place, and that can be confusing. So we don't quite know where things are going to go, and it's maybe a good feeling, maybe a challenging feeling too. Hope is certainly talked a lot about in climate change communication circles. I like to emphasize active hope, and the idea that hope is great and keeping positive is really important, but also how do we make those positive visions become real with action and commitment. excitement, and we can feel excited about some of the changes that are coming up. I've been reading a little bit about like this tipping point for renewable energy and how it's becoming like actually viable and on a big scale. So for me, that is exciting and feeling like there is some good positive change going on. And certainly love, and we talked about in the first workshop, the importance of connecting with your community, people you care about, the environment, the natural world. And we really need that sense of love and connection to make positive change. We want to focus a little bit on climate anxiety and grief because these are so prevalent and certainly being talked about more and more. So it's really natural to feel anxious about what's going on and uncertain, thinking about your family, thinking about your community, thinking about people that you care about, places that you care about. So it's very important to give space to those feelings. There can be a tendency sometimes to recognize that there's a big problem and then just want to go out and fix it. And climate change really doesn't work like that. It's such a big multi-generational issue. And a lot of feelings come up thinking about all the changes that are coming and the changes that are here. So it's important to give time and space to some of those feelings and not just feel like you have to rush ahead and let's figure out how to fix this thing. Certainly solutions or positive future choices to make a positive future are very important, but a big part of the process is sitting with emotions and giving space for those. So grief is also really relevant. We're more used to talking about grief, say with people that we've lost in our lives, but certainly for me, I feel grief around the loss in the environment that I grew up with, all the rapid changes we're seeing, thinking about the future. So it really needs some time to work, with that grief and really feel it. And then that can help motivate you to some action. But it's important not to skip over this processing step. So the feelings can really lead us to a sense of agency. So it's not like we have to just get stuck in wallowing in fear and anxiety, that it can really motivate us to make positive change. And outcomes are not predetermined, so things are still open. Emotions change. We're not stuck, as it were, in one place. I've been thinking about this point quite a bit recently. I'm a musician, so I'm always thinking about art and creativity. And more I can see that we need imagination and creativity to work with feelings about climate change. And it's really important to give space for those positive features in our lives. It can be really paralyzing to feel alone and hopeless with climate anxiety. And certainly I felt that myself, feeling like no one else is on the same page with me. There have been a lot of studies about how anxious most people are about climate change, but often don't get a chance to talk about it. So giving a place to talk to people, to use our imaginations, to feel like we have some agency is really good and helps us connect with each other and look for ways to make positive change. We can also recognize individual and collective stories. I put that in quotation marks because it's very, very broad, that perpetuate anxiety and inaction. So maybe it's just your own beliefs that there's nothing I can do, it's too late. It could be more of a societal story, like we can't do anything to change the economy. That's the most important thing. All of these stories intersect with each other, and they can often be under the surface. So recognizing those narratives, those stories that are generating anxiety and a sense of being stuck, is a really important step in moving forward. And also using your networks, talking to people in your community in workshops like this, giving space for that imagination and creativity. Like what could the future look like if we really thought about more positive ways to move forward? It could be anything from community organizing around sustainability or resilience, changing economic systems, looking at different ways to interact with people in your community. All these things take some imagination, and giving a sense for how that can relate to your life is really important.
So now I kind of want to, switch gears just a little bit and talk a little bit about how trauma sort of weaves into all of this, and having climate change conversations with other people and being aware of trauma in your own life. Because climate change and the consequences of climate change can be traumatic. If we think about it, there's wildfires, floods, heat waves, and these are very disruptive to people's lives and can be very traumatic experiences for people. So being aware that this is something that people go through when you're speaking with others about climate change can be a really important thing to keep in mind. And something else that I would like everyone to keep in mind as they're having these conversations is most likely you are not a trained mental health professional, and there's only so much that you can do when you're having these conversations. So it's really important to recognize your own limits. And if you are talking to people about climate change, sort of be aware of when to maybe redirect the conversation or when to suggest further help for someone if they're really struggling with, these big emotions. And know that it's okay to pause or even stop a conversation or an interview that you might be doing. That's okay. It's always possible to do that. So with these next few slides, I just want us to all keep in mind that climate change can be traumatic, and that's something that we definitely have to be aware of when we're speaking to others. One thing that I, in particular, have found very helpful has been self-reflection. A lot of these things that I'm going to talk about, I sort of approach them from an oral history and interviewing perspective, but they work just as well if you are just having conversations with people without the intent to record or interview. So, before you even engage in the conversation, ask yourself, am I comfortable talking about the topic of climate change? What do I need to do or what do I need to do anything ahead of time to make sure I feel comfortable talking about it? And then, am I prepared to listen to potentially traumatic events or stories? Because they likely will come up. And I find it helpful to ask myself, am I okay with listening to this? And then how will I respond if any trauma does come up during a conversation? This is another, and I think obviously everyone's different in how they respond to difficult topics, but again, just thinking through it ahead of time so that you can kind of rehearse it a little bit, and how will you respond if someone brings up a really difficult topic? And finally, another bit of self-reflection: is there any trauma that I'm experiencing or have experienced in the past that might be exacerbated by talking about climate change and these issues? So again, it's just self-reflection and again, awareness of who you're speaking to and awareness of yourself as well. And I just have a few tips for if you're having these climate change conversations with people. I have found really helpful, and I've found that the people I talk to have really appreciated that if you just acknowledge in the beginning that this is a really hard topic to talk about, because as Jason was saying, it's huge, it's intergenerational, it's not something that's going to be easily solved, right? So even just acknowledging that fact right off the bat can help people feel a little bit less anxious about having these conversations. When you're talking with anyone, pay attention to their body language and to their voice. So, are they closed off? Are they crossing their arms? Are they, a lot of times, the voice modulation will change if something difficult comes up. And you don't necessarily have to stop talking about it, but just be aware and watch for these little cues that maybe something is going to be difficult for someone. As you're having conversations with others, remember to listen deeply and remain respectful and responsive to them. Again, paying attention to body language and what they're actually saying. If you are doing an interview, this is where I find it helpful to write down your questions ahead of time so you are able to listen deeply and you're not worried about what you're going to ask next.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Like listening is a skill that takes practice.
Yes.
So doing an interview, it is like a conversation, but it's a bit different. So very often you have to leave some somewhat awkward silences, and it feels like you should fill up the space, but sometimes your interviewee needs time to process what's going on. And also, if you're doing a recording, it's great just to have some time for the interviewee to speak without having a lot of interruptions. But it can be very unnatural to do this at first, so just be aware of that.
Yeah. And just a quick tip about the leaving space. While if you're doing an interview, I again find it helpful to actually write myself a note to do that. And I've actually had people continue to talk then. So it can be helpful in that respect too.
Yeah, very often silence can trigger the conversation or the interview to go in a direction which is really interesting, and kind of breaks out of the mold a little bit.
Right. I've also found it helpful during these conversations to, in the actual conversation or in the interview, specifically check in with the person you're speaking with, and ask them, how is this going for you? Are you okay talking about this? Are you okay continuing to talk about this? And this is, again, showing respect for them, for their time, for their emotions. And the sort of secondary benefit to checking in with your interviewee is you also get a little pause to check in with yourself as well. And you can, just nothing big, just, how are you feeling? How do you feel it's going? And if there's any kind of adjustments that you feel need to be made.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about climate storytelling and how that can lead into climate action. There's certainly a lot of ways this can happen. It's not like there's one way for this this shift to take place. But one thing we do want to consider is how can we leverage our climate stories, other people's climate stories to promote some action to confront climate change. So one thing to think about is as storytellers, as interviewers, interviewees, you are leaders, and it's not just like a little sideshow. It's really making bringing these conversations about climate change into the mainstream is a really important form of leadership and pushing things in a new direction. As we talked about, stories engage our emotions, so they're powerful. Leading with a story or leading with a conversation about climate change is a powerful way to promote a way forward. It's not just let's talk about CO2 emissions or sustainability, but really how do we feel about climate change? What do we want to do about it? How can we talk to each other about that? So these are some ideas we've talked about, is showing rather than telling how we feel about climate change or what climate change is very powerful and can promote people's engagement with the issue. So having thought about that, thinking about your personal climate story can really help other people identify with you and the need to take action. So on a very basic level, climate storytelling, connecting with each other, connecting with our emotions, promotes leadership and moving climate action forward. So I like to bring up this model, and this is actually from Marshall Gantz, who is a scholar and was very active in the labor movement in the 1960s to organize farm workers in California. And he's really been an advocate for storytelling on a social level. So it's not just the story is more than just a personal story. It's connected to a much bigger network of people and how we think about ourselves, how we relate to other people in our community and society. So he lays out these three sides of storytelling leading to action and social change. So the story of us, the story of self, and the story of now. So first of all, the story of self is certainly your own climate story. So thinking about how you relate to climate change on a personal level is that first step. By moving beyond that and interviewing people in your community, you're contributing to a story of us. What are we working towards? How do we interact as a community? How does climate change influence us in our day-to-day lives, in our social relationships? our economic relationships, that builds the story much beyond just a personal story into a story of culture, society, community. And certainly now, climate change is an urgent issue. We all know that. This is really the main issue of our time, in my opinion. So it's something that's very, very relevant to talk about and to share stories about right now. So you also see in this diagram community, purpose, and urgency. So all of these elements of climate storytelling build on each other and can help promote climate action. And just to give a couple of examples about what this has looked like for me and when I've done workshops. I worked with a lot of school groups and had students, or the teachers I've worked with have had their students use their climate story to write letters to elected officials about making positive change or advocating for some legislation that's going to reduce climate change. That's a very, very direct way of connecting like a story of self to the story of us and the story of now through an issue of just like letter writing campaigns. So it doesn't have to be anything extremely complicated or fancy, but using our climate stories and climate story interviews to make this bigger network stronger is very, very effective. It's there's no one right way to do this. There's lots of options for leveraging our climate stories. All right, so I'd like to open it up on the for you guys. So we'd just like to hear from you. What does climate action mean to you? What is your place in the movement to confront climate change? And how can we translate climate storytelling into positive action and change? So I've given you some examples from my perspective, but let's just take a few minutes and talk about this. Depending on how far you've gotten in your stories, that's great. If you haven't done it yet, that's fine too. But in your own life, in your society, in your community, what does climate action mean to you? What's your place in the movement to confront climate change? And how could we leverage our personal stories or other people's stories to confront climate change? How about you, Kelly? You want to kick us off?
Yeah. For me, I've felt almost paralyzed by thinking about climate change and how it's going to affect my kids as they grow up. But yeah, I feel like this is maybe kind of like a freebie, but doing the work with Climate Stories Project, it works for me as well. I feel like I am a fairly good storyteller, and I've always loved to write and be creative. So this is sort of a place in the climate movement where I feel like I fit. I'm not necessarily the kind of person that's going to go out and join a protest. That's just not who I am. But by doing this work, it works for me, and I hope that it's making some kind of difference, no matter how small it is.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Mary? You still there?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I'm also not the kind of person to necessarily attend a protest. And it feels futile sometimes to the things that I can do, which are like, contact my representatives or vote or, things that I would do anyway, feel insignificant or like not enough, because it seems like a bigger problem than is something that an individual can change. And being an easy thing is like, this is something that we're thinking about at Metro a lot. And that's the reason that we brought you here to, spread this message and try and help people do these sorts of programs in their own libraries and things like that. So yeah, it is something that we are thinking about constantly. And I'm very interested in like the policies surrounding that different libraries across the country and in our area especially have for climate change. Like, what do you do when there's another Sandy? So trying to figure out ways that we can mobilize the library communities in our area to prepare for that sort of thing before we get there and be surprised by something is something that I'm helping out with at Metro. So yeah, okay. Thanks for the reminder. I am doing little things.
Not to put any pressure. Yeah, well, I mean, I think moving forward with the work and with storytelling and making your own stories, hopefully some of these ideas will come to you. And just to relate my own personal experience with this, this project's been going on for about 10 years now, and I started this with no sense of like storytelling as a vehicle for social change. I just wanted to. I'm still making these music pieces that incorporate climate stories as an artistic approach to communicating climate change. But more and more as I do the work, I do see storytelling and interviewing as really integral parts of making social change. And I think it's building on itself. I think more and more we're seeing more people comfortable having conversations about climate change and building or changing climate action from just a political action into much more of a deeper social issue. So I definitely encourage all of you to feel confident that your story really does matter. It's not just like a throwaway. Really, anything you can contribute to this conversation, share, talk to other people, it really does make a difference. Even though it might seem small, it can really build on itself, and you never know who you're going to touch. You might talk to someone, maybe it's a family member who just never really thought about climate change very much, or finds it too intimidating or too uncomfortable. So by having that conversation, by listening to them, you are contributing to a much bigger dynamic. So.
Yeah, so kind of building off of that, we'd like to show you a short story from Wangari Maathai, environmental activist, and about doing the best you can.
Yeah, I'll just say about, if you don't know Wangari Maathai, she's no longer with us, but she was a groundbreaking environmental activist in Kenya, and starting in, I believe, like the 1970s, she worked with women, rural women who were having to walk farther and farther away from their villages to collect firewood because so many trees had been cut down and the land had been damaged over decades. And she thought a really simple way to address this, to get more trees for firewood, is just to start planting trees. It seems so simple. And she started very, very small. She started just with herself and with people in her local village. But the movement, it's called the Green Belt movement. It just grew and grew and grew and grew to the point where you can now like look at satellite pictures from before she started and after, and to see millions of trees that have been planted and are now part of these forests in Kenya that are reducing desertification and erosion and giving people more access to firewood and the benefits of trees, which we all know there are a lot of. So the point of her message and the point of showing you the story is that it might seem futile, it might seem like such a small contribution to say, share your story or to talk to someone about their story, but it really does add up, and people respond to that energy, to that motivation that you have just demonstrating by taking part in this. So I will be a hummingbird.
Yeah, so moving forward and in the spirit of Wangari Maathai, we just want you to do the best you can with this. And whether that's recording your own climate story, recording an interview with someone in your community, having conversations with people about climate change. Yeah, do the best you can with it. If you would like to, please feel free to share your story or your recorded interviews with us at Climate Stories Project. It's completely optional, but please, if you would like to, please do so. And as you continue to sort of move forward in your storytelling, in your climate storytelling, please feel free to contact us and ask for help or ask for advice, or even, just to run ideas past us. We're definitely here to support you in this work.
I just want to remind people of the website where you can share your stories. So this is just climatestoriesproject.org, and there's a lot on here if you're just to remind people of climate stories and information about other workshops, etc. But when you're ready to share your story, if you want to, or your interview, if you want to, It's just this share a story tab on the top of the navigation here. So the first one is share your own climate story. It gives some tips about planning the story. A lot of this we went over in the workshops, but it's a really good reminder. Some recording tips on recording audio and just how to go about that in an effective way. And then here is where you give permission. And so we just need to get your first and last name, your email address. Phone number is totally optional. We need to know where you're living, so your hometown and city and your country at least, today's date. And then you need to grant permission for us to share, edit and share your story. So that's just that little checkbox here. If anyone's under 18, you just need to make sure you get or children get or people you're speaking with get this permission from their guardian, parent or guardian. Here you can upload a recorded MP3 file. So this is an audio story. Video is a little the files are a lot larger. So the best thing to do if you want to submit a video story is just contact us, and we'll give a link and we'll find a way to share that story. We have a nascent WhatsApp group, which is a bit of a pilot program at this point. We're seeing how that's going to go. But at this point, if you want to use WhatsApp to share a story, say you record your interview and you just want to use WhatsApp for that, and that should work for now anyway. And if you want to go ahead with that approach, I would say just contact us to facilitate that, and stay tuned. Okay, and also please upload, if it's an audio story, please upload a photo of yourself, which you can do on this website. If you're doing an interview, it's just a second.
Sorry, can I just add, Jason, regarding the photo, it could be about something you talk about in the story as well, because I've had people not want to share photos of themselves.
Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
So if you're sharing an interview, it's this other item in the drop-down menu. It's pretty similar. Some tips, interviewing tips, ideas about questions. These are pretty much the same prompts that we've given you already. So here we need you to put your interviewer information. So as the interviewer, you put your similar information in this first section. Second section, you put the name of the interviewee. So we need their name, their email address, hometown, country, etc. In this case, you're making sure your interviewee grants permission to have their story be shared. So you could, if you're doing this remotely, you could just walk them through it. You could just ask them the question and fill out the form as you go, or you can do it on the site or whatever works for you. Same idea here. You can upload the interview as an MP3 file and the photo of your interviewee. And if it's a video story, just please contact us and we'll facilitate that. All right, so that's about all we had then for today, unless there's other questions. But we want to thank everyone so much, and thank Mary and Metro for inviting us to share our work about climate storytelling with everyone. And yeah, keep it up. I'm excited to see the energy out there and the enthusiasm for this kind of work. So there's our contact info. Email address is good. There's also a contact form on the website if you want to reach out. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.